Welcome back, everyone. It's Uncle Destiny here with you. It's time to see what the reading for December holds for us. As has been now a very interesting month, and a month that has seen relief for many of us and increased stress for others, we're coming to terms with what it means and where our direction goes, not just for us here in the U.S., but the rest of the world as we still deal with the next wave from COVID hitting us. So we need to see what that holds. We're also looking at the winter solstice this next month as well, and the kind of end to the seasonal year that starts with this season, with this particular season. It's sort of the gateway that ends the season as we move into that final period, just as the spring equinox is the opening of the new seasonal year and the symptoms of rebirth. So the nature of winter and death is kind of apropos with the fact that we're having this growth with COVID, but also the potential changes in the political structures as well, our power structures. So we're going to see what the ancestors and the spirits have to say about all of this. And I want to also remind you of something that I think I've said in earlier videos, is that the reminder that some people have described this year as an apocalypse. And the root of that word in ancient Greek meant to uncover and reveal. This is a very different concept to the biblical apocalypse that has been touted and has been put forth by some and justifying in their behaviors and how they view and act during this time. It's also very different than the apocalypse that we see in any of the big blockbuster movies or even the backdrops for novels. So we're dealing with an apocalypse that is in some ways much more inner-centered, that is much more about what and who we are moving forward, because the greatest growth is not always from outside, it is from within. So let's see what the ancestors have to say. Alrighty, so we have thrown the bones and we've got our spread here as well as our Adinker card. Now normally anything that goes off the reading surface is not usually read. And in this case we had the dice go off the surface, but it did stop, and it stopped on the number 1. So I'm going to bring it back into here and just bring it back into what it also means, because it also helps with the overall theme of what we're looking at here with the spread. And number 1 has come up before for us, and it actually came up earlier this year, and it associates with the aspect of self, appearance, first impressions, beginnings, and our attitude. So everything that we're going to be dealing with in overall of all of this is related to that sense of self, that sense of how we appear in the world, what are the first impressions we give, the beginnings of new things, and especially the attitudes we take with the image of self, the attitudes we take with appearance, the attitudes we take with first impressions, and the attitudes we take with beginnings. Now, this is coupled with what we got from the Adinker system. This one is known as the Elders of the State, Council of the State, and this centers around democracy, the dual essence of life, which means we have both life and death, good and bad, love and fear. It also talks about interdependence, and those things are interdependent as well, because you cannot have one without the other, and let alone everything that lies in between them. And the wisdom that comes with that is one head does not constitute a council. Two heads are better than one. And we're coming from this standpoint now as we look at this image of self and the attitude we've had of ourselves has it become a place, and is there a time for us to move on from that place of just being solely dependent on our own sense of self and how it now interacts with that sense of those outside us? Equally, those who have been just so centered in and placing their place around those who deal outside, how do you now deal with what's going on for inside of yourself? And that is equally coupled with the sense of appearance. How do we appear with those around us? And equally, how do we appear to ourselves? What are the first impressions we give? Are we giving the impression of not just confidence, but a sense of empathy and ability to connect with others? Or are we going with a sense of independence at the cost of others? This is a chance for new beginnings in this month of December and this month of the solstice, because these can be the things that we are setting the place for as we say goodbye to those things that are the opposite to that sense of self, appearance, first impressions, beginnings, and our attitudes. One of the questions that has come up with the election here in the US is, how do we deal with what has been shown in that aspect of the apocalypse? The attitudes that were presented and are still being presented with the reaction to the election, as well as to just dealing with the general public safety around COVID. And a bunch of those things are strengthened by a influence of the outside group. There are also those who have to come in question about who they are and who their sense of self is. Is it being inflated positively by the group, or is it being inflated negatively by the group? And that also comes with that sense of self and that sense of first impressions. Many people now have gotten a first impression after what these last years have provided about people in a way that it's going to take a lot to change. And it's not just saying, I'm sorry, and we move on. It's also going to take an issue of reconciliation. It's going to take, what are the efforts of change? Not just what I've said, but what are the actual tangible actions that are taken for change? And what is the attitude that's done from them? Are they done with a sense of genuosity for wanting to heal, or are they done just out of the idea that they're supposed to do it? Which makes it an ingenuous apology. It makes it a tainted, I'm sorry. So when we look at the main bones here, when we've got sort of this spreading out here, this one is work, this one is home, this one, I'm hearing the phrase, this one is choice, which is a very different bone configuration that we've had before. So I'll also point out here, we've got the shell piece, which is turned to the inside. So again, we're looking at what's going on internally, the internal world, not the greater experience. Now that can be the internal of your, say, immediate family, but more often than not, it's about ourselves. And it's about that sense that we have of who we are, what we've been doing, why we have been doing, and how we have been doing it. Which leads back in equally to what the one has been saying about our sense of self, our sense of appearance, our first impressions that we give off, as well as how we interpret them. The sense of, do we know what we're beginning? Because if we know what we're beginning, we also know what's ending. And what is the attitude we put forth when something is ending so that we can begin? Do we begin from that idea of just sadness? Which is what I think is coming up here with the bone talking about choice. Are you choosing to look at what has been with only the place of sadness? Which means you're looking at the past and you're missing the potential of what comes in the future. So, can you change the attitude and look at what is possible? What can we build out of this? Because anything that we build has to start from may have had to start from something that had fallen before. So that said, as I said, this is choice. And it's sitting within proximity to several of the support bones, but mostly the spinal bones, which tells us, again, it's about that core sense of who we are and what we're choosing. And we have a sense of inspiration coming in here with this root bone. And it's also terminating next to the shell piece again, which is the internal. And that internal aspect and the internal choices, are we going to try and make something new? But we've learned from the past. The other aspect is, with everything that has happened in this last 4 years, especially within this last year's, so much of how we have centered ourselves about who we are is being called into question. Things that have been used to avoid looking at self are being called into question. Our economy cannot operate the same way that it has. So the sense of money and the sense of efforts that are put into it have to shift. Going back to what once was isn't going to serve us. And this is also that premise around those who hold on to this 1950s Leave It to Beaver, Oz inherited world. That only speaks to a small number of people. It only represents a small number of people. It doesn't represent the greater good, not for people of color, not for people of LGBT and intersex beliefs. It doesn't even represent the beliefs of certain religious faiths. So holding on to that is actually keeping us from growing into new places, new beginnings, and the invention of new language to describe what we're needing. And that's what we have to do here with this sense of going inward. We have to find that new sense of language, those new beginnings, and accept the endings that are coming. And that's part of our choice. And that's also being supported here by the copper piece under the shell. This is Spirit saying, yes, we need you to go inside. Yes, we're supporting you so you can go inside and make those choices so that you can then thrive on the outside. And we've got all of these support bones around it and this sense of thought. And it's not just blind faith anymore. It needs to be informed faith. It needs to be informed trust that is driving you forward, that Spirit wants you to be operating from as you make these senses of change and importance. And again, we have more on another level of support here, mostly spinal, but also, again, just a bit of that inspiration, that breath that's going to be needed for that shift and change. Over here, like we said, this is sort of the home family bone for this time. And again, it brings us back to the shell and that sense of self and our sense of family. Much of what has happened has also shifted the sense of family. Many people have suddenly found that people who were part of their family of choice can no longer be part of that family of choice. But more importantly, we've also seen people who have been part of our blood family. So parts that we can never unsee. And that's also, again, about that principle of the first impressions. We've always had a first impression about our family members that we have held to, but now having seen how they have responded, not just to the election, but even to the sense of how we deal with our health around COVID, we have to have a new impression and let go of that first impression of them. So there's a lot of, again, shift and change. And again, where we look at where these two bones come together, there's almost forming a pivoting point. So you're going to have a pivoting point here. And that's where we then get the inspiration going over here into the quartz piece. And remember, the quartz piece is the aspect of crystallized memory, so that we can turn and look at it from multiple different places. And that means looking back at those first impressions and saying, okay, that first impression was right, or it might have been wrong, or it's time that I need to have a new impression about this. What didn't I see? What am I maybe overlooking? And most especially that sense of something is changing. And what is the attitude I'm going to have with that? Across all of this, we have the work bone. And that's staying stable, but even then, it's still angled slightly down towards this crystal and the quartz. So it's, again, assessing that sense of being, that sense of the first impressions, that sense of how do we appear, that sense of what's our beginning and what's our attitude. And our attitude about the work we do. And again, this is not just the work we do to pay the bills. This is the work we do for why we are here, for our development as a soul, our development as a person, our development as a community and a culture. All of that is at play here. Now, over here on the edge, we have the bone, the top of the spinal cord, which, as I've said many times, can be the top of the spinal cord. It can also remind you of the pelvic bone and the cavity that allows for the birth of a child. And it's at the edge here. And there are new ideas and new thoughts coming forward that are also going to birth new beginnings, new ideas, new ways to address it, because we have to address that disease is something that no amount of moral or religious belief can affect. It might have some influence, but it cannot affect, and that a disease can kill you. A disease can make you sick and take you from being vital and life-living to being infirmed and having to find a new way to connect with the world around you. And I think that is also supported here with the fact that we've got two of the tailbones here for balance. We have to have that in balance with what we are creating, what we are thinking, what we are birthing into new. And over here we have the broken rib bone, the bone that I would say is about strife. And it's at the edge, and we have to keep that at the edge, because that is what will undo any of this. And sometimes that does mean we have to take people out of our lives that are just generating strife. It means doing that inner work and assessing, are these people who are pulling me back or pushing me forward? And that's part of the assessment we're having to do now, thinking about our sense of community, that sense of, are they a head that is helping us drive us forward, or is this a head that is driving us backwards in this council of elders, in this council of state? Because we've got to look at who are our elders, who are those that are part of our sense of state. Because we can have those who are in that position of state that will operate from that place of fear and will drive us back because it is what they feel is safe. But that is for them, not for all of us. Equally, we've got people who will drive us forward and have a sense of long-term thinking. And I say that again, long-term thinking. And that is the system that spirit works in. It works in a long-term vision, because it has a much broader sense of perspective than we do here on this level, down at the bottom. Down on what some would best describe the river level. Our ancestors are birds flying overhead. They can see hundreds of feet further ahead than we can see here on the river of life. And the spirits, the deities, the orishas, the gods, all of them, they're up at the mountain view. So they can see the river, they can see us on the river, they can see how far it bends and twists. And they can see where the rapids are, where the tree has fallen, and where that cutoff that's going to take us off out of the valley. Because they have to have a long-term view, and we need to also operate from that. Long-term, not short-term. So, that is what the ancestors and their spirits have to say for us for this month of December, this solstice, at this end of the year of 2020. So look for the readings at the end of December for the year 2020, and then in January 2021. And we move forward from there. Blessed be. Ashe.